Hello gang, Tattooed Biker here with you, and tonight I've got 3 true Bigfoot encounter stories to share with you. Our first story takes us to California, where 2 brothers on a hunting trip hear a blood-curdling scream that leads them straight into a bizarre encounter with a Bigfoot. Next, we head off to the mountains of Tennessee, where a resident is plagued by a mysterious creature knocking on their front door. And finally, a camper at Cascade Lake near Lake Placid shares a chilling sighting of a cryptid during a morning stroll. If you enjoy this sort of content, make sure to hit the like button or subscribe with notifications on, and then let's ride to Bigfoot country.
Number 1. Hey Tattooed, I've got something to share, and well, this story is a very personal one and a very long one, so I appreciate the time you're going to take to read this. Just to be clear, the story you're about to read is 100% real. It happened to me and I remember it like it was yesterday, but it actually happened over 3 decades ago. You see, I was born on July 14th, 1958, so at the time of this tale, I was 33 years old, and it happened on August 28th. My dad would always take me and my brother, Jeremiah, hunting and fishing, so that custom stayed with us forever. That day, it was 1991. I was hunting in Jackson Demonstration State Forest in Mendocino County, California, with my brother, Jeremiah. It was a little bit difficult to pattern the deer there because of the water, and the area is extremely thick with lots of young growth. 2 hours had passed, and we only had 4 rabbits on the day, so we started to think about getting out of there. But we stayed for 1 more hour, just to make it worth our while. When we finally agreed that it was time to go, we heard something coming from behind us. Then, there was this loud scream. Not a human scream. An animal scream. But it wasn't any animal that we'd ever heard before. So we decided to go back and look for the source of the sound. As we approached the area we thought that it came from, we noticed that there was nothing there. We started to search the area, but as we were doing that, I felt the presence of someone, and I instantly felt I was being watched. I turned around looking for someone or something, and I found something in the distance, hiding behind some trees. I didn't call out to my brother, as I didn't feel it was important at the time, but when I had almost reached the trees, I saw a heavily built, hairy man running across the tree line. I grabbed my .22 rifle and followed the footprints left behind by the creature, and after some 3 or 4 minutes of following, I finally caught up with the thing that left those enormous footprints. He was only about 30 feet away from me. I hid as best I could, and he didn't see me, but he certainly heard me because he started looking around and making some weird noises, as if he was trying to communicate. At first, I wasn't sure if I should step away from my hiding spot or not, but I finally decided to do so. I stood up there and pointed my rifle at him, slowly approaching until I was just 15 feet away. Looking at him, I noticed he was like 8 to 9 feet tall. He had reddish hair that covered him almost completely. Just part of his face and the palms of his hands had no hair. I also noticed that he had some white hair in his torso. He just looked at me and stood there, making those weird chattering noises, but suddenly locked eyes with me and actually mouthed the words, "No danger," very slowly, almost unintelligible, while he pointed at himself. At this point, I was stunned, and I lowered my rifle and still watching him. The nervous expression on his face had disappeared, and then he just turned and started walking into the forest. I turned around and started looking for my brother, still very much in shock. When I found him, he too was a wreck. I told him what had happened, and he told me that he saw one too, a female creature, with her baby in its hands. I'm not sure, but it's very possible that the Sasquatch I found was the mate of the one my brother found, and the little one their brood. While we were making our way back to the road, I looked back, and I swear I saw him, off in the distance, observing us as we were leaving. We never talked about this to anyone, but my brother contacted me recently with another story that I may share with you some other time. And because of that and this story, I became very intrigued about the subject. So I thought I'd share this story with a few people. Here are some things about the Sasquatch that I encountered that I remember very clearly. He had reddish-brownish hair and white hairs on his torso. He had a deep voice, but was capable of screaming at a very high pitch. His footprints were like 18 inches long and 9 or 10 inches wide. He also had very, very big hands, but they looked very similar to those of a human, just much more hairy. He had hair in his face that formed some kind of beard, and he also had some hair on his forehead, but his skin was more or less light-colored, with a wide nose and wide lips. He looked almost like a hybrid human ape, almost like a Neanderthal. He was extremely muscular. He didn't seem to be able to stand up completely straight for very long. He had a somewhat clumsy-looking way of walking, but he could certainly run pretty fast. And he had some kind of language that reminded me of a human language. He apparently knew a few words of English, and he seemed to be a peaceful being. I appreciate you for letting me share. Signed, Dominic. Number 2. Dear Biker, I live in the mountains of Tennessee, and well, something has been knocking on my door around 11:30 to about 2 a.m., maybe once every week, and has been going on for quite a while. When it first started, I had thought about your BEK videos, and it gave me enough credence to not go outside. I've also had to start keeping the glass door locked because something kept opening it. The night before I started locking it, the door opened, and this huge hand covered my peephole. So I started locking that door. The next morning, I discovered where someone had urinated on the glass door. Every time we clean that door, something comes back and pees on it. Every single time. I've left it this last time, and whatever is doing it must stand at least 4.5 feet off the ground, which is where the pee starts. My neighbor and I have this same problem. We started comparing notes, and, well, we've decided that we have a hairy person problem. So between us, we call him Harry. He doesn't come around much in the winter, which is interesting. Our Harry smells like a wet skunk, with just a touch of dirty wet dog. We've learned that when Harry comes around, we pick up that skunk odor, which doesn't linger. When a real skunk comes around, the odor lingers. Around Easter, something came around that was, well, absolutely putrid. Evidently, it was a different hairy person. This one had the classic stomach-turning odor. It's been around here twice now. The knocking is very annoying. The dogs always lunge at it. There are evenings when it will knock twice, I swear, just for the pure entertainment value. My neighbor and I decided to experiment on the knocking. I was telling her about it. At the time, my front door was closed. I knocked on the glass. The little dogs, exhausted from barking all day Friday, ignored it. I knocked on the wooden frame and they started yapping, but there was no lunging. It was more like a, "I heard your knocking, now quit it." I'm beginning to think that Harry knocks just to drive them crazy. If he were up to something truly frightening, it would be very simple to knock in a window and create a disaster. But he just snoops around the windows. He never touches them, but he knocks at the front door. If it were just me, I would say I'm losing my mind. Luckily, he does the same thing to my neighbor. Like she said, it's as though he's trying to antagonize the little dogs, just for the heck of it. I've been collecting things for a garage sale, and figured it would come around to look. One Friday morning, we had put out my mother's Christmas wreaths to sell. It had been wrapped in big garbage bags. Sure enough, that night, Harry came around, knocked on the door, and prowled around a little. My neighbor and I messaged back and forth while it was going on. She smelled him, and then I smelled him. He prowled around for a good hour. We even know where he might be hiding, which is kind of freaky. Yesterday morning, I went out to put things back out for the garage sale, and I went to put the wreaths up on the hanging basket bracket. One or two of them had traces of that hairy odor. He had been snooping through the carport, touching things. If it had been skunked, everything would be noxious. The things that he touched were well off the ground. There was his lingering odor on one or two things, and on the door close to a closet. Because the items were in different locations, it tells me he was snooping around a little. He was feeling the wreaths. You could trace the lingering odor on them, but only one or two, not all of them. The odor was only on certain parts of the two wreaths, and there were 24 of them. Evidently, he was feeling the texture of the artificial greenery, touching it. That absolutely amazes me. He felt it to see if it was real, touching it. That reeks of intellect and an ability to explore something new. My neighbor was actually excited about it. I was completely freaked out, and my mom thinks it's exciting. She told me it proved that they were intelligent beings and not animals. This from my 85-year-old mother. I thought I caught a glimpse of a shadow a few times when I would look outside the door. In other words, when something is new in the carports, it looks around to check it out, like it's part of the neighborhood, like a nosy neighbor. I talked to a guy the other day who was telling me that he knows more people right around here who have had the same experience. It's like he just bops around the neighborhood at night, checking stuff out. He was telling me that one of his co-workers who lives near here sees one pretty constantly, and everyone in her family has seen it, and recently. Thanks. Signed, Sean. Number 3. Dear TB, this happened in early August of 2010. You see, I spend most of the summers camping in and around the Adirondacks in my Dodge Caravan. This particular summer, I had stopped at Cascade Lake to spend a few days there camping. I had slept soundly the previous night, and I woke up around 7 a.m. I decided to get up and start making my breakfast. I had just started the kettle on the camp stove when I looked over at Upper Cascade Lake, and I could see the mist rising up off the surface. I grabbed my iPhone and walked about 50 yards to the edge of the lake to get a picture. As I approached the breakwall, I noticed a dark brown object on the opposite side of the lake at the shore. At first, I couldn't make out what I was looking at, but it seemed to be sitting at the water's edge. I then realized that it must be a bear. The animal looked like it was doing something in the water with its paws, as I could hear a faint splashing sound. I thought it would be a good idea to get a picture, so I brought my iPhone up to face level and tried to focus in on the animal. As I was focusing in, this animal, well, it just stood up on two legs. I was startled and pulled down my phone to see this with my own eyes. It took a step towards the tree line and stopped. And then, almost methodically, as it stopped, it turned its whole upper body to the left and just stared at me for a few seconds. It turned back and in one step just disappeared into the tree line. When it looked at me, I immediately went cold and got scared. As I ran back to my campsite, my only thought was that it was going to go either left or right. If it went right, it would have to go into the water, and if it went left, well, then it was headed directly for my campsite. I decided it was best to get the hell out of Dodge, so to speak. I arrived back at my campsite in just a few seconds. My dog was still asleep on the front seat and didn't stir at all. I yanked open the passenger side sliding door of my van and started to throw all the camping gear into the back, making quite a mess as I did. I slammed the door and then jumped into the driver's seat and floored the gas to leave. As I was leaving out, I kept looking out my left driver's side window to see if I could see it again, but I never did. I drove all the way into Lake Placid and parked at a mall parking lot to gather my thoughts and think about what had just taken place. I was pretty shaken up as I kept replaying the experience over and over in my head, just trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Thanks. Signed, Victor.
Quick narrator's note here. I emailed the witness back and wanted to know if he ever got that picture off and ask if he could provide any more details. He responded.
Hey biker, I got your email. And photo? No, I just couldn't. I'm not sure why, and when it stood up and stared at me, my mind just went completely blank, other than run. It wasn't even like I could hear the word run in my head. It was just this overwhelming, primal need to flee. It's really hard to describe. In details, well, I couldn't ascertain its height exactly because of the distance, but if I had to guess, it was probably 7 to 8 feet tall. And it was covered head to toe in shaggy, dark brown fur or hair. I could see the sunlight shining off its back as it turned to go into the tree line, and I could see the brown coloration as it turned away from me. When it turned to stare at me, I couldn't make out any facial features, but I knew that it saw me. The upper body was absolutely massive and stocky, like a football player's build. It had really long arms that went well below its waist. I could also make out what I assumed were the shape of its hands. It walked upright and paused before slowly turning its upper body to look directly at me. It stared at me for probably 5 to 10 seconds and then turned back to face the tree line. It took 1, maybe 2 steps before it had disappeared into the forest. I could see a few branches move after it went into the trees, and that was when I decided to leave. I never heard anything other than the initial splashing that it made in the water with its hands when I was thinking that it was a bear. I didn't return to that area until 3 years later with a friend to camp. Nothing has happened on subsequent trips to the area of Cascade Lake for me. I have 2 other odd experiences in other areas of the Adirondacks on other trips. Maybe I'll send those to you later on. Thanks again. Signed, Victor. And there it is. All the true Bigfoot encounter stories that I have tonight. So what did you think about these encounters? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter or experience that you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description and your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. I sure do appreciate it. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker, out.